This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
For over a century, the demise of the bison seemed a simple, straightforward story. The arrival of railroads had flooded the plains with Euro-American bison hunters, and in just a few years they destroyed herds that had reportedly numbered 60 or perhaps 100 million animals. Genocidal U.S. military commanders had encouraged the slaughter as a means to suppress Indian people who relied on the animals for subsistence. A profligate, greed-driven white hunt in the 1870s devastated a North American icon and nearly wiped out the species in a little more than a decade. By the 1890s, only a few hundred bison remained alive. The story attained mythical status in North American culture and went virtually unquestioned. As a compelling narrative, it opposed villains, white hunters, and victims, native people and wild nature. As a morality tale, it cautioned against the greed of unregulated capitalism. As a political critique, it promoted the necessity for federal regulation of natural resources. After centuries of cheering this apparent dual conquest of both Aboriginal people and wild nature, North Americans shifted to self-criticism in the 20th century, and the bison story fit the new narrative splendidly. What had been heroic only a few decades earlier became cause for regret and repentance. The fate of the bison served as a cautionary tale about unregulated greed, ethnic insensitivity, and the destructive potential of the modern industrial economy. Then, in the early 1990s, it turned out that the demise of the bison was not so simple, so straightforward after all. In a matched pair of articles that upended Plains history, environmental historians Dan Flores and James Sharrow revolutionized our understanding of what happened to the bison. The story they revealed was more complex, more nuanced, and more interesting, if less polemical. Rather than stereotypical noble savages who were morally superior but doomed to succumb to white civilization, native people emerged as active agents of their own history, more human, more fallible, and directly implicated in the decline of the bison herds. In a landmark 1991 article in the Journal of American History, Flores brought to bear insights from environmental history never before considered. First, he used a basic ecological accounting of grassland carrying capacity to show that the old estimates of bison herd size were wildly inflated. The grassland could never have supported 100 million bison. Flores put the maximum sustainable herd size at about 29 million. Next, he pointed out that native people, and not only white robe hunters, had hunted bison also. Based on careful archival research and anthropological evidence about bison consumption by the southern tribes, he demonstrated that natives overhunted their resource base, at least from the 1840s, decades before the onset of the white hunt. He estimated that at least half of the original southern bison herd was already gone by the time the railroad and white hunters arrived on the scene. By 1870, the southern herd had already been overhunted for decades to feed a growing native population and, increasingly, for commercial export to supply Euro-American markets. James Sharrow, in a 1992 companion piece in Environmental History Review, focused on ecological competition for grazing land. He highlighted the immense size of native horse herds, as many as 6 horses per person in some tribes. So large were the herds that bands needed to move camp every week or two as their horses grazed adjacent grasslands to bare ground. The hundreds of thousands of Indian horses competed directly with bison for grass, reducing carrying capacity at the same time that overhunting increased. With a 1-2 punch, environmental historians revealed that the old story of the collapse of bison in the Great Plains was incomplete. Maybe completely wrong.